Imagine traveling back in time all the way to the year of 2004, or around that time, and going to the biggest online video game forum like GameFAQs and making a post that simply says, the next Xbox will be the place to play JRPGs. You would have been absolutely torn to shreds and made a complete laughingstock on that website. And let me be honest with you, I would have too. Xbox has never had a strong presence in Japan, and that is still true today. But there was a very brief moment in history, and I mean very brief, where Xbox was the go-to system for JRPGs. It didn't last long, but it was true. Let's go ever so slightly further back in time by a couple years, when Square and Sakaguchi were in their prime. They believed themselves untouchable, and back then I might have agreed. It was during this time that Sakaguchi decided he wanted to write and direct a feature-length movie. This movie became Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, which cost roughly $137 million to make, $70 million original budget, $30 million on marketing, and $45 million of the $70 was for building the studio the movie was made in. And then it lost about $90 million at the box office. This sent Sakaguchi into a deep depression and generally low morale for a couple years. Square Pictures shut down, and over the course of this time after The Spirits Within released, Sakaguchi grew tired of his leadership position within Square, so he resigned. In this period, Sakaguchi opened a studio based in Honolulu, Hawaii, called Mistwalker. This studio had early funding from Microsoft, and in return, Mistwalker would make 2 exclusive JRPGs, these games being Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey. Today I am focused entirely on Blue Dragon, and maybe in the future I will do a video on Lost Odyssey if this does well. Let me start with the gameplay. The gameplay in Blue Dragon is kind of interesting. There are 9 classes total, and every 10 levels you can pick a new one. Each class has its own set of skills you can equip to your character, so you can create a build or multi-class in a sense. This is where my issues begin with the game's systems. When you start the game, you start with 3 total skill slots. When you start the game, you might think you will naturally unlock more. You will not. Instead, the developers thought it best to attach unlocking extra skill slots and special accessory slots to a class. Yes, that's right. Skill slots are attached to leveling up a specific class. Usually, I am completely fine with things like this, but these skill slots and accessory slots almost feel required to even begin to dig into builds and skill synergy. There is no SP share system like other RPGs. Equipping a class means that only that class gets SP, so you're kind of forced into a grinding loop, I guess is the way to put it. And the most reliable way to grind SP for these classes with any efficiency is to level up another class, to unlock a skill called Field Barrier 3, which insta-kills any enemies you've already defeated once. And the most reliable grinding spot to do this method isn't reached until roughly 20 hours into the game. And even then, you still need to go do a grinding method against an optional boss to steal God knows how many special accessories from it, called a black belt, which doubles your SP gained. At a baseline, this class system is great. I just wish it was more, I suppose. More variety in skills, more interesting synergies, an easier way to get skill slots. Now that I've gone over the class system, I should get into combat. This is your standard turn-based JRPG affair. However, the game does do some small tweaks to the formula that I do like. An example of this is the charge system. I don't think this has an official name, so this is what I will call it. In combat, magic and sometimes physical attacks will make you do this small minigame where you hold A on the controller and you will fill up a bar. However, filling up this bar also determines when that character uses that ability. Let's use this clip as an example. I made Maru do a normal attack, and because I have the monk skill charged attack, this makes every attack, magic sword and mow down a charge, giving it more power the further along the bar you go. I can either tap A and make him attack first, or I can hold A and try and get it in between Jiro and the boss for a little bit extra power, or I can take it all the way to the end to what the game refers to as the sweet spot for a big boost to attack power, and will also make the attack happen a little bit faster. Not all the time though, so you can sometimes get situations where you let go after another character and still go before them. I think this is another system in this game that has really good foundations, but the developers don't really do anything more with it. The charged attacks you do at the start of the game are the exact same you're doing against the final boss. I guess the only time it really becomes something you have to pay attention to is the very few optional super bosses the game has. Even then, provided you have the correct buffs up and keeping them up, you're probably going to be absolutely fine. While I'm talking about the combat, this game does something that I really like. You may have noticed that in some footage before this point, the battles have 5 party members. This is permanent. Many JRPGs have a large cast of party members to pick from. Persona, Final Fantasy, Fire Emblem. I always feel as though I am neglecting party members at times. And in some games, I even feel bad for not taking certain characters to fully understand their story, like in Baldur's Gate 3 for example. And in some cases, it feels even worse because you will pick your party, then go through a dungeon and all your party members are with you through cutscenes and story beats, regardless of who you selected. Outside of combat, you traverse fields and towns to progress the story, just like classic JRPGs with their overworlds. As I briefly mentioned earlier, classes can unlock field skills. These are special abilities that you can equip and use while in the field and in dungeons. While I appreciate the effort made by the developers to change up the overworld gameplay, I feel as though some of those field skills are just too specific for any normal play. Let's take stealth for example. This is obviously intended to be used to get behind enemies to get a back attack. But the issue is, most of the time back attacks don't matter, especially if you have done any grinding like I mentioned earlier. And that's it really. Most of these field skills are just intended on being used to get back attack. Once again, this is a really cool concept and is a system that a sequel could have expanded upon. Going back to the general world and exploration, there isn't really all that much to do here, honestly. As you progress the story, you'll obtain these devices that will unlock these coloured barriers that are scattered around the world. These barriers give you access to chests and quote-unquote areas, but most of the time, and I mean 99% of the time, you're just opening barriers to open a chest that has magic or a pretty good special accessory inside of it. But outside of this, there's not really any incentive to go back to these places or even explore in the first place. And this is true until you unlock the Mechat, which is this game's airship, which now gives you access to land in places where you couldn't get to before, places in between the walkable areas. This is also how you access the optional bosses. These bosses are really hard, harder than I expected, especially after grinding my classes to 99 and being at around level 50 character level. There's not many of these super bosses, maybe 5 or 6 total, but they're fun. If you do play this game, don't do the side content before doing the final dungeon and final boss. You will be severely overleveled. Because I had chosen to grind my classes to level 99 and do the optional content, the final dungeon and boss became a joke. I beat the final boss in about 6 or 7 hits, and it kind of ruined the experience for me. Okay, one last thing I want to mention before I talk about the story. This is going to be a mini rant, a very small one. Very early in the game, you will come to realise that almost everything within a room can be interacted with. Pots, wardrobes, tables, everything. You will get 10, 50, 100 gold, XP, SP, and stat increases. It's a pretty decent system. However, you will very quickly notice you will sometimes get a nothing from one of these interactables. Now, if you're going into this game blind, like me, you're not going to think about it. Why would you? If you're like me, you're just going to think it's visual feedback, just telling you there was nothing in the pot, table, whatever, literally. This is fine. This is an okay system. It feels a bit false, I guess, in trying to get you stuck into the game for longer, but again, it's fine. It's 2006. That's the era where games would do anything to keep you playing. I played the game with the assumption that I could ignore this system. I had the thought of, well, I'm not getting anything super important from this, so I'll just do it whenever I felt like it. And that's fine until you get to Jabril Castle, which is about 12 or 13 hours into the game. Once you've explored the courtyard and marketplace for a bit, you will eventually come across a man called Nothing Man. And now at this point, you're probably putting two and two together. Yes, that's right. These nothings you get are actually a tracked system where at specific number intervals, you get a powerful special equipment. According to some people online, there are about 2,000 nothings in the game, and you need 1,800 to get all of the equipment. And guess what? On the Xbox store, you can find a DLC for 65p that has 6 accessories. One of these being an accessory called Nothing Glasses. And while you have these equipped, interactable items are marked with a green star to identify ones with a nothing in them. This is quite egregious to me because it means the developer went to every single item in the game and marked it with having XP, SP, stats, or nothing, and they've done this with the express intent on selling a DLC to you. This DLC, to me, is equally ridiculous as Oblivion's horse armor, yet no one talks about it. And I'm not going to completely dunk on this. I will be fair. Out of the 3 most important equipments from this list, 2 of them are farmable. You can get as many as you want of these. The third one you can get multiple of as well, but as far as I remember, it's a bit more tedious and you are limited in how many you can get. So I guess ultimately it doesn't matter, it's just wild to me that they've done this and got away with it. Anyway, rant over, time to talk about the story. If you want to avoid story spoilers and play this for yourself, go to the timestamp on screen, it will also be in the description. The story follows 3 friends, Shu, Jiro and Kluk, who live in Tolta village, which is ravaged by what the villagers call the land shark. In an attempt to stop the land shark, these 3 friends hatch a plan to trap it and defeat the land shark. This doesn't contain the land shark long, and the 3 of them get swept away to an underground cavern. After exploring this cavern for a little bit, the land shark reactivates with them on top of it and takes them to a floating mecha fortress. Here, we find out about Nene, the game's main antagonist. While in this fortress, Shu, Jiro and Kluk end up consuming these blue orbs which give them magical abilities called shadows. Once they escape and you start exploring the next area, you come across Marumaro, who takes you down to an abandoned hospital ruins to try and find medicine for his sick village, which was caused by Nene. And this is where the issue starts of the narrative. This is the game's story cycle until some key parts in Disc 3. Every village you go to has been struck with a catastrophe that Nene has caused, and you just deal with the issue at hand there and then. This is a fine way to do a story, especially for a studio's first outing, but for me personally, I want more variety from the events of a game like this. Now, thankfully, villages aren't the only places you go to. There are dungeons or areas in general to split up the village stuff. When I started the game and saw that 4 of the main characters were children, I had a worry in the back of my mind that either all of them or Shu and Marumaro would be immature characters. Thankfully, this isn't the case. Sure, the game lets these characters have immature moments or funny moments, but they are in downtime or low stakes parts of the story. It's not like you're in a critical point of the story and suddenly Shu or Marumaro start acting immature. When the story requires it, all these characters are rational and mature. There's a scene towards the start of Disc 3 after everyone loses their shadow, where everything begins to look hopeless. Everyone is stuck in a village where one of Nene's curses forbids anyone from leaving. After a couple days of trying to escape, trying to get their shadows back, Shu is watching the moon at nighttime, and a young girl comes up to the cliff face to attempt suicide because of the entire situation. Shu manages to talk the girl down, and while doing so, he regains his shadow. It's scenes like this that really help enforce that these children are not your stereotypical immature, stupid kids you would find in JRPGs. Hey, future me here. Turns out these characters aren't even kids. Looked it up during editing because I was pretty sure I heard that they talked about their 8th or 10th birthday or whatever. Apparently they're 16 and 17. Oops. Whatever. I'll leave this in. Back to the review. My issue with the story is that it rarely ever peaks. For most of the game, it's a flat line with the occasional bump, and then towards the end of the game, the bumps become a bit more noticeable, as you actually clash with Nene more often and eventually deal with him. When you start Disc 3, you find out that the blue spheres at the start of the game are fragments of Nene's soul. He gave them to 5 people to strengthen them, so he could take them back and regain his full power. As I said, this is also where everyone loses their shadows. A good portion of Disc 3 is spent getting everyone's shadows back, and soon after this happens, you're pretty much at the final dungeon. I wish I could give you a full rundown of this final dungeon's narrative, but I can't, especially the very final cutscenes. I'll try my best though. When you first enter this point of no return, Nene will activate ancient machines that split the planet in half, revealing that the planet was ancient machinery all along. In between the halves of the planet are cubes with all these different biomes on them. Lava, desert. I assume these are where the ancients lived? We end up flying over to a cube called Primitive Cube. We defeat a dinosaur boss and get a hologram message from Nene. Here he tells us that we are the only ones who can use magic, and he wants to rule over the non-magic users and pick one of us as a successor. Then at this point the dungeon is just over an hour of puzzles and combat to get to the final boss. And when you get to the final boss, you finally get to confront Nene. You defeat him. Zola pretends to betray us because she was originally working with Nene and Nene wants his final soul piece back. She double crosses Nene and finally takes him out. Then Zola throws Nene's Giga Soul away, and Deathroy, the green frog thing on Nene's shoulder the whole game, consumes Nene's Giga Soul and takes the power for himself. We defeat him and move on to the controller chamber. Now, this is where I sort of lose track at what is going on. You would think that we stop all the calamities, like what happens in the ending, and close up the split planet. But we don't. We only stop the calamities and leave the split planet as it is, then just live on the cubes? I don't really understand this ending at all. I'm sure the 2 Nintendo DS sequels go into it a bit more, but it's unlikely I'll play them. To me, this ending isn't really satisfying at all. Nene still won, in a way. The Earth is split. People are now living on these cubes instead of on the planet's surface. Maybe the ending was rushed, I don't know. So my general thoughts on the story is that it doesn't really do enough to keep you engaged. Things just keep happening really fast, and it's that what keeps you engaged. I guess it's fine for a JRPG though. The last thing I have to say for this video is for Phil Spencer, Matt Booty, Sarah Bond, whoever has to hear this. Please, do not leave this game on the Xbox 360. The game being on backwards compatibility is great, but physical Xbox 360 copies won't last forever, and not everyone has access to the internet to download it off the Xbox store. So please, remaster this game, or even a remake, I guess. Just get it onto modern platforms, please. The same with Lost Odyssey. Sincerely, please do not let these games become relics of gaming. Preservation is super important and needs to be done for as many games as possible.